Hello crafty friends, it's Alicia here with the project for Tailored Expressions. I don't know about you, but sympathy cards are some of the hardest for me to make and send. In today's video, I'm going to be using products from the Second Chance release that will help us be better prepared for the next time we need one. The new products I'll be using today are the Piece Within die set, which was a gift with purchase last year, the new Layer It Piece Within, which has some frames and another botanical die, as well as the new Mini Strips Sympathy stamp set. Previously released products I'll be using are the A2 Layer Stacklets, the Shiplap Background stamp, and the Mini Strips Coordinating die set. I will be using Sugar Cube and Oyster for my card base and insert, and my color palette is Lavender, Glaze, Peaches and Cream, Pineapple, and Blue Corn. For stamping, I'll be using the exclusive TE Teal Misty, the Just Press tool, the Sizzix Heat tool, and for heat embossing, I'm using VersaMark Ink, Detail Silver Embossing Powder, and the Anti-Static Powder tool. For embellishing, I'll be using the Silver Matte Enamel Dots and TE Vellum. To hold everything together, I got out foam sticky strips, the Scotch tape runner, and my Barely Art liquid glue. Let's get crafty! To get started, I'll be doing some die cutting. I'm going to use the second from largest of the stacklet dies on each of the 4 colors, and then I'm going to use those 4 botanical frames, one on each of the colors of cardstocks. Then I brought in a piece of oyster cardstock, and I'm going to cut those same botanicals from this single sheet. From the single piece of vellum, I will be die cutting 4 of the scallop frames and adding the ridge texture from the Layer It Piece Within die set. Here's a look at those pieces cut. It is kind of hard to see on camera, but there is just a nice texture added by that inner frame. Now it's time to do some stamping. I'm going to be using the Shiplap Background stamp on each of my 4 colored cardstocks, and I'm going to do a tone-on-tone look with the same colored inks. I'm going to start with the Lavender Glaze, which I think is the lightest shade I'll be using today. That's because when I clean the stamp later, in case I don't get all the ink off, I don't contaminate a lighter ink pad with a darker ink. To hold my piece of cardstock in place, since I can't use a corner with the background stamp, I added a little bit of adhesive on the back and took off the tack with my fingers. Now I'm going to lay that background stamp flat down or face down over my piece of cardstock and pick it up with the door. I inked up the background stamp with Lavender Glaze, and to help me get a nice impression, I used the Just Press tool. Between each of the inks, you will want to make sure to clean your rubber stamp, and I don't show it here, but I did also clean up the other side of the platform. Next, I brought in the Peaches and Cream ink, and I did the same thing for a tone-on-tone background, and I followed it with the Pineapple and the Blue Corn, once again making sure to clean everything well between the colors. Now, you definitely wouldn't have to do multiple colors like I am today. I just wanted to show you what the same card would look like in a variety of shades. Now, if you don't have the Shiplap background stamp, you could use a different background. You could use an embossing folder or maybe even a stencil. While I have the Misty out, I'm going to stamp my sentiments. Once again, I'm using the new Mini Strips Sympathy stamp set. I'll be stamping onto a piece of sugar cube and heat embossing using VersaMark ink and the Detail Silver embossing powder. I got my stamp set up on my piece of cardstock, making sure there would be room for me to use the die, which you will want to make sure that you ink up and stamp those squares for alignment later with the die. To ensure that the powder only sticks where I want it to, I did prep the cardstock with the Anti-Static Powder tool, and then I inked it up and stamped it twice. My VersaMark is a little dry, and I wanted to make sure it was nice and juicy for when I pour on the powder. Speaking of that, that's what I did next. I brought in the funnel tray and poured the powder over my sheet into it. There was a spot that I had to fix, and once that was done, I brought in my heat tool and set it. I always like to come in from the back first after I've let it warm up for a little bit, and then I bring my tool to the front and finish melting the powder. Cutting these out is super simple with the coordinating mini strips die. I lined up the stamp squares with the squares on the die, and to hold it in place I used some Scotch removable tape. And now I have an assortment of Sympathy sentiments. All of the pieces are ready, so now it's time to start card assembly. To help the botanical die stand out from the background, I will be adhering the oyster copy behind it just at a slight offset. To do this, I'm using Barely Art liquid glue. I like that fine tip to get behind these leaves, and the liquid glue gives me some wiggle time. Once I do have the adhesive on the back, I put it onto my frame. Starting in that lower right hand corner, I just tried to get the same amount of oyster all the way around on those edges. I set that first one to the side to dry and continued adhering the other pairs together in that same way. I did let these dry for about 5 minutes before I moved on to the next step. Once they had dried, I brought back in the vellum pieces, and now I'm going to add a botanical frame to the center of those. I'm using liquid glue once again, getting all the way around the frame and behind pieces of the die cut center. Using the ridge lines on the vellum as a helper guide, I centered it on there, making sure to press down everything nice and well. And just like before, I set each of these off to the side for about 5 minutes to dry. For the next step, I brought back in my stamped background and the coordinating ink pads. And now using blender brushes, I'm going to add a little bit of a shadow around the outside edges. Using circular motions and a light hand, this just gives it some more dimension. Off camera, I cut some sugar cube cardstock to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. These will go on the inside of my cards so the personal message is easy to read. I had planned on cleaning off my blender brushes at the bottom to add some color to the inside, but I did find on some of my brushes there wasn't enough ink left, so I did re-ink it up just a little bit. You'll see there just that little bit of color added to the bottom. I continued the same process for the remaining colors, and then off camera I prepared 4 top fold oyster card bases. Using a tape runner, I added the sugar cube pieces to the inside center of each card, and then to the front I added the stamped piece centered as well. I really like to try to find a way to add decoration to the inside of my cards. Do you as well? Let me know your favorite technique for the insides in that comment section below. After those were adhered together, I brought back in my vellum pieces, and now I'm going to get those added to their coordinating cardstock background. For this, I am using liquid glue just so I can get behind the botanical die cut and have a little wiggle room so I can make sure to get it nice and centered. Here's a close-up look at one of those finished. I just love the delicateness of that botanical frame with that kind of rough shiplap background. I finished putting those together off camera, and I also picked out some sentiments for each of my cards. Sometimes it's a 2-part sentiment, sometimes it's just a singleton. I did also add some foam sticky strips to the back of each piece to pop those up off the card a little bit. I also used a variety of placements for the sentiments, and once all of those were adhered, I brought in the silver matte enamel dots and added a trio to the front. I thought that this pulled in the oyster cardstock and that silver embossing on the sentiments. And here are some close-up looks at the finished cards. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch today's video. If you enjoyed the process, a thumbs up is appreciated. And if you're not already a subscriber, we do hope you'll click on the button below so you're the first to know about our latest videos. To find out more about the products I used today, you can check out the links in the description box below or visit the Tailored Expressions online store at tailoredexpressions.com.